Welcome to Designing Cities for All, another episode, and it's part of our 2-year-long activity and research program,
where we take a deep dive into designing products, spaces, and systems for all. Just because you feel safe, or you feel welcome, or you feel included, doesn't mean that everyone else around you feels the same way.
We don't stand alone. We're not individuals that somehow a planet or an island, you know?
And I think that's the beautiful thing of a diverse society, that everyone can add something from out of their own experience.
Things won't change just if we just let things happen.
I think if you can build relationships and use design as a tool to build those relationships, the better off we're all going to be.
Everything around us was once designed and can therefore be redesigned.
Belonging is a very, very important concept.
You can try to take someone's place for a while, but you don't have the lived experience.
Let's begin by acknowledging similarity and affinity.
Be a person, not your role.
I think inclusion is not a choice.
Inclusion happens by design or not at all.
In order to create truly inclusive public spaces that are accessible to everyone, we have to underline what everyone actually is.
Real inclusion, it's got nothing to do with the norm, but it's like something that we create from all different perspectives.
You know, so even when we bring everybody at the table, does everybody's voice count the same?
Because it's a big question of who tells these stories.
You know, the more I explore about other cultures, other religions, is the more ingredients I have to make the architecture and to answer the questions I get from society.
Not fitting in was a blessing, or I would have turned out just like you.
So, hello everyone. Welcome to Designing Cities for All in Pakhuis de Zwijger. This episode is part of a 2-year research program in which we take a deep dive in designing cities, products, places where we could all fit in and where we all feel like we belong. This episode is part of a triptych co-curated by OneWorld, and we're going to talk about redesigning journalism in this triptych. Welcome to everyone here in the room. Also, welcome to people watching from home. Hi there, maybe you're seeing or listening to this live. In that case, you can also ask questions if you like. We use Mentimeter for that, and you can log into menti.com and insert the code 86492213, and we would love to see your questions popping up on the screens here so we can ask them. And for you here, of course, you are also invited to be part of this conversation. Just raise your hand. There's someone here walking around with a microphone, and they will come to you so you can participate as well. This night is gonna last, or this talk is gonna last for an hour. After an hour, we shut down the cameras and we have a conversation where we want to invite you to be involved, all of you. So we can maybe elaborate on some things that you heard here or listen to, or maybe you want to add something to the conversation because we're really curious about what you have to say as well. My name is Dimfie Brown, and I'm not sitting here alone because we also have guests, obviously. I'm gonna name the names of the guests that we invited today first. That is Chidem Yüksel, sitting at the end of the table here. It's Rachel Moron, sitting in the middle. Online, we also invited Legetko Makola, live from South Africa. And next to me is sitting Seada Nourhussen, chief editor of OneWorld magazine, co-curator of this episode, and actually this triptych that we're organizing together. Last time we talked about language. What is the topic that you chose for this edition?
We chose the topic, I think everybody here knows why they're here, but we chose the topic of imagery or image and the power of images in journalism. Last time it was about the power of, choice of words, terminology, but I think that the first thing people look at is the picture accompanying an article. I think we sometimes, social media is such a big factor nowadays. So sometimes we try out like A/B versions of stories with a certain image and with another image, and it makes like a world of difference. Sometimes the exact same story with a certain image doesn't do anything, just falls flat, and nobody reacts to it. And when we change the image, all of a sudden it's like, people are engaged and they feel, connected. And so, which is, for a journalist, for somebody working with words, is kind of hard to acknowledge that the image is actually much more powerful than the words. So I think it's a very important topic to talk about, especially in journalism and media. Of course, it's not a new thing. But I do think that we don't talk often enough about the power of the photographer, the person behind the lens, and the choices that person, but also the people in the editing room make in, shaping our view of the world. And, these are not coincidences. These are not, sometimes it's just patterns that are
because
that
that
are
is
there.
something that we do in the triptych as well, like looking at the power structures that are behind these things.
Yeah, and I think photography is, I used to be a Africa editor for a Dutch newspaper, and I really was an annoying editor because I would sit beside the people, people like Rachel. I would come and sit beside them and be like, I want to know what type of picture you're going to pick out for my story. So because I was writing about a continent that is underrepresented, misrepresented often, and so I knew my story was okay, but the picture could change everything. I would tell them I don't want any children recognizable in the picture because they haven't given consent to be part of this article. The power dynamic between the photographer and the person in the photograph. So all of these are things that I used to think about as a journalist already, especially coming from Africa myself. So I was sensitive to these things. And with OneWorld, we've actually, we can talk about this later, but we have a certain, policy when it comes to images where we don't reproduce certain inequalities. And we don't, for instance, when we talk about, racism, we don't reproduce racism to show racism. There's many ways to.
There are other options.
There are many other options. For instance, a big topic in this country, maybe it's not known in South Africa, but or maybe it is because there is a joint history. But a big topic around December in this country is the topic of Sinterklaas and Zwarte Piet, and we've covered those stories, but we don't reproduce Zwarte Piet. So, for instance, I think it was a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, Facebook decided. I think they caught up with the topic, and they decided that images of Zwarte Piet were no longer allowed on Facebook.
Yeah, they were not going to reproduce that.
Yeah, so everybody brought the news, right? That Facebook made a statement. We're not going to use images of Zwarte Piet. And what did all the media do? To show people what was not going to be shown anymore, there was like this mass, like you couldn't look anywhere, or there were images of Zwarte Piet everywhere. So you could tell that there was this, there wasn't any know-how to talk about the topic without showing the topic, So
this is probably one of those design flaws that you see in journalism, and especially talking about image.
Yeah,
we don't have the proper tools.
There are tools enough, I think, but I don't think there's the conversation behind it. Like, okay, what alternatives are there? How can we talk about this subject without reproducing it over and over? Yeah. So those are one of the things that go on behind the scenes at OneWorld.
We're not going to solve that in an hour, but we are going to talk about some of those aspects that should be part of that conversation. You've invited 3 guests to join us tonight. Let's start with the person sitting next to you. Why did you invite her?
Well, Rachel, is it Rachel or Rachel? Rachel, right?
Rachel.
Yeah, is an image editor. You could say, is that the English word? Yeah, beeld editor, photo editor at NRC, which is one of the biggest newspapers here. And I thought it was very important to have somebody here who is working for a mainstream title that has to deal with daily news.
Big newspaper in the Netherlands.
Big newspaper, and has to deal with daily news, and is also at the same time herself very aware of power dynamics. She's somebody who works with photography herself, and has done an exhibition on the representation of Caribbean people. You're from Curacao originally, and I was curious to know what it's like to work at such a huge title, and what are the dilemmas that she faces, or the things that she, or maybe the things that she solves or has to solve, because she's maybe one of the only people there thinking about these things.
We're going to answer that question in a few minutes. Next to her is Chidem.
Yes, Chidem Yüksel is a photographer. She's actually recently joined our team, in the sense that she's going to be writing for a new section in the magazine. This is the magazine, if you can subscribe, and it's fun. It's called Buiten Beeld, which is actually, well, how can I translate Buiten Beeld? It's like, it's kind of like things you don't really see. So everybody looks at a picture differently. And I asked Chidem to start that section in the magazine, to kind of take one picture. It can be an iconic photo, it can be an unknown photo, and discuss it and show us what is not seen in the picture. Because she works with imagery and stereotypes, and she can tell that about her research herself, but she's done a huge research on the representation of Muslim women in Dutch media, and the biggest image bank of the country, which is ANP. So I thought it's very interesting to have a photographer who's also a researcher at the same time.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about the things that we don't see enough yet. And then we also ask you to invite an international guest. And you mentioned, like, okay, then we have to ask Leghet Komakola.
Yeah, I actually immediately thought of him, because we did an interview with Leghetto, I should say, sorry, back in, 2 years ago, in 2020, when he was the first African chair of World Press Photo. You were the first, right? Yeah. Sorry?
Yeah, the chair of the grand jury.
The jury, sorry, of the jury, and we did an interview with him about all these years of World Press Photo, and what makes an iconic photo, and what were the criteria up till then, and which new criteria did he introduce. And it was an interesting interview, and I thought it was, and he's, he has such a huge track record. This is just one of the things he's done.
Well, let's talk about that track record, maybe, Leghetto. Can you maybe introduce yourself a little bit, because images and imaging is a big part of your career. Seada just mentioned, you're now the chair of the grand jury of the World Press Photo, but you're also director of the Javed Art Center. What kind of role does images play in your daily life, in your career?
My name is Leghetto Makola. I'm currently the CEO of the Javed Art Center at one of the biggest universities in our region, the University of Pretoria, but a very interesting university. It comes from the apartheid era. It's one of the oldest universities that used to be the anchor for the apartheid system in terms of product research. Ironically, I'm with them now, so it says something. And before that, I was head of the market photo workshop, a very founded by photographers in the late 1980s, just before the release of Nelson Mandela. So the country was going through its own transition, and the school was established, and it kind of laid ground for future photographers of this country. Before then, obviously working in museums. My first trip to abroad was Rotterdam. I worked at the Museum Boymans.
Yeah.
Back in 2005, I think. So yeah, I was exposed to kind of the global image making from fine art to film. You know, obviously photography. I worked with archives, early 2000s, as a manager of oversight of archives and production of curated projects out of photographic archives. How did I get into images? I grew up in apartheid South Africa, and the images played a huge role in bringing attention to the plight of the people of this country. Both obviously, most of the images, certain images were banned, but the images that were made available were generally of violence, of black violence, black bodies being violated. But those images, some of them actually helped us to kind of bring attention and focus to the country. But before then, images again, as we know, in the global south generally, photography was used as a very horrible tool of suppression and erasure through ethnographic and anthropological excursion to the global south generally. So images that we see of ourselves were made from a very particular agency, which was about suppressions, was about dehumanizing.
Yeah, so that were the images that were spread around the world.
Yeah, but also internally within the country, many of our people came to accept those images as images of themselves. And in that, this erosion of dignity, where the representation of you is not necessarily you, but you're beginning to believe in it, because these images were enforced. And when you study history or biology, these are images that are in your books, textbooks, for you to learn as a little kid growing up. So in the 80s, that's what we're exposed to. And I guess within me, there was a sense of reluctance. I wasn't going to accept this. And I wanted to go into animation and film, but it was difficult then because obviously access to higher institutional learning for Black people to study certain disciplines was not allowed. So I ended up studying fine art, and fine art was an entry point to image making in general, but also image activism, because I regard myself more so as an image activist than an image maker. So fine art exposed me to photography, but also film. I went to study film at Howard University in Washington, D.C., which is regarded as the Black Mecca, the Black intellectual space, the oldest Black university in the States. So being exposed to these knowledges in studies around our identities, both within the continent but also in the diaspora, through film and any form of art, really built my vocabulary in critiquing images, but also a sense again of agency to really push this agenda of representation in decision making. Because obviously we know very well that as much as we speak about photographers making certain types of images, they make them for agencies, they make them for corporates, they making them for highly powerful established institutions globally of media practice, media ownership. And those, many of them, I think, over time, up until recently, had no intentions to think about issues relating to representation, ownership of knowledge, diversity and difference. That the world in the global south is huge, and it has people that think, people that produce images. They don't take images, they don't capture images, they don't shoot. They make images, because I think those three terms are very important in the anthropological growth of photography, where we use capture. You capture an image, you capture a moment, you shoot, you take. They're very aggressive technology that again I think in our region represent what this tool was used for. Market Photoshop, I think, again in this country played a huge role since joining it back in 2013 to begin to think carefully around these terminologies, but also what it means to become an image maker. What's your responsibility?
Yeah, the responsibility.
Yeah, and I think those things becomes important. But
What would you say that in one sentence? What is that responsibility? In a short sentence, what would you say? What is the responsibility of an image maker?
Ethical practice is storytelling. I think ethics are important because they humanize the process of making images, the choices that one makes when you engage and tell the story of other people, because we say we witness, but also at the same time we author. So framing an image, I've provided two important images for my conversation, where decisions can be, you can decide to position your camera from a very particular composition that compromises you as a human, because already you're creating a very worn-out presence of a human. You to tell your story in a much more powerful way. So those choices are really, really, really important.
Thank you. I'm moving to another image maker, because I'm sure some of the things that the Ghetto said respond or resonate with you. Chidem, you're a photographer, and lately we can also call you a researcher, a photography researcher. Can you explain a little bit, can you share a little bit more about your mission as a photographer, but especially the work you're focusing on for the last 2 years?
Yes, I started my photography career at the Volkskrant, and I learned the profession there. So I became a photojournalist.
Yeah, so that's also a Dutch newspaper.
Yeah. And I traveled a lot with a lot of journalists, and I photographed a lot of stories they made. And while traveling with them, I found out that my freedom to tell my narrative of the story wasn't really there. So you have the newspaper, you have the journalists, and they already know what kind of story they want to tell. So as a photographer, you have to make that story visible. And in making that story visible, you're making a lot of choices, of course. So I did that for 2 years. I started as an intern, after that as a freelancer. And after that, I started to focus more on long-term projects because I felt the need to photograph more the complexity of stories. And now I'm really busy with...
You wanted to make more series of pictures.
Yeah, and take more time to tell stories, and to get people to get to know people and their stories. And now I'm focused more on what's my power as a photographer, and it's in which system am I working, in which system am I producing photos. So yeah, almost 2 years ago, 1.5 years ago, I decided to write a research report, and it was about the representation of Muslim women in the image bank of the ANP. Because I wanted to know...
The ANP is like the national image bank where a lot of photographers upload their pictures.
Yeah, it's a press agency. It's the press agency of the Netherlands, and they're offering a lot of services. And they have the biggest image bank of the Netherlands. So almost every news agency or every media outlet uses the image bank. And I was wondering what kind of images do they offer from Muslim women for over 30 years. And I started analyzing them. You should download and read the research report.
What was, in short, your observation? And did you already expect this outcome, or?
I had vermoeden.
Yeah, a clue.
A clue,
Because what did you find out?
In my research, I analyzed the photos. So what do I see on the photos? How are these women photographed? Do we see them on their faces or not? And in which places do we see them? Most of the time what I saw was that there were a lot of photos taken outside, taken on the street. like a Muslim woman is walking by.
Yeah, or the market.
And a photographer is photographing them. And I have to mention that I only analyzed the photos which were tagged with the term Moslima, like Muslima in English or Muslim woman. And I analyzed 3 periods. So I needed more and more time to analyze everything. So I analyzed 3 periods for over 30 years. Yeah, so I call it safari photos, that kind of photos. So they were just taken outside of the street. The women are not aware of the photographer. I saw a lot of photos of that. And I also analyzed the descriptions the photographers add to those photos. Because as a photo editor, when you want to use a photo, you have to know what the photo is about. So they have to write what the context is.
Yeah, you have to add tags.
Yeah, and I saw that a lot of photographers were using words which has really nothing to do with the photo. So a lot of photographers were using a few sentences, like a Muslim woman is walking on the street, and then also a few words. Words like allochtoon, integration, inburgering, sometimes even safety or Islamization or...
So in translated, that would be words that contribute to a certain stereotype.
Yeah, it were words that are being used in politics. These are words that are used by Wilders and extreme rights.
So a random individual was already politicized. So she's just walking by, and then the terms attached to these person are very political, very, well, like you say, stigmatizing, but it's not even just stigmatizing. It's very weird to attach all these labels that have to do with societal issues to an unknown...
A random person.
A random, but
groceries.
also anonymous individual.
Yeah, so to get more insight in why photographers are using these words, I interviewed 7 photographers. And they told me that the reason why they use these words was because they want to sell their photos. So they are using words that they read in articles in the newspapers and are again connecting it to those photos to increase the chance to sell their photos, because we always write about Muslims, so you have to the chance that a photo editor is again searching for the photo of a Muslim is really high. So,
and is there? I'm just going to ask some questions.
I'm already noticing many design flaws.
Because I'm thinking, talking about a system, who started this trend? Is it the photographers, knowing that using these terms and these tags and these descriptions will help them sell their pictures? Or did it start from the newsrooms where they are being encouraged to use these definitions to make their work easier?
Yeah, so I don't have any answer on that, but what I know is that it's a commercial system. So if you want to earn your money with photography and with selling this kind of photos, you have to make your photo visible, and you make it visible by using words that the media is also using. So in this particular case, the commercial system is dominant, and not journalism, not ethics. It's the commercial system. It's making money, so they're doing it, even though they know the words I'm using
have nothing to do
with this photo.
That's what they said in the interviews. They said that they were aware of the fact that
one photographer said to me, "I use the words allochtoon, and I'm really ashamed to use that word." He said, "I never use that word in daily life, but I put it next to the photo because I want to sell my photo." So it's the commercial system.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe that's a great moment to introduce Rachel, because you are working in a newsroom. And you are one of those person, well, maybe not looking for that word, but selecting pictures that are also coming from a data bank like this. Can you explain a little bit about your work and what is your responsibility?
Okay.
Hi, yeah, so I'm an image editor, which means that I am pretty much paid to look at images all day, which is great. Yeah, as a responsibility, I think, look, especially when it comes to this specific example, as an image editor, you're often tasked with finding an image within 10 minutes, sometimes even when there's like a really fast news.
Yeah, because how does it work? Someone comes standing next to you at your desk and says, okay, there's an article, we need to publish it.
No.
You have to go to the printer, or...
I was just interfering, but yeah.
How does it work?
I think well, I think the digital version of someone standing next to you is Slack. So somebody actually just Slacks you literally 5 words of, I need an image of something to do with Islam, or I need a picture of Lil Kleine, and you don't know the context of what the article is.
So no
say,
context, just like I'm writing an article about this person, or...
Oftentimes not. Sometimes you do. Sometimes people will put the whole article in there for you to read before you find it, which I find great. Sometimes I ask for more information, but 9 out of 10 times, when you have 5 minutes to look for an image and they tell you, I need a picture of this thing, you go, okay, I'm going to look for you because you need to put this as fast as possible, because that's the reality of working in a news editing.
So there's not much time for context?
There's not much time for context. There's not much time for reflecting on your own biases. And sometimes you're just using the words that were given to you as well, right?
So in this case, for instance, it's a story on, let's say, one of those tag words.
Yeah.
Like one of those, let's say, in
I would say there were...
How do you look for pictures?
So there's 3 moments where I think an image editor can practice their power or can have a moment of self-reflection. So the first one is, do you use an image from an image bank like Ampe, or do you, or if you have more time, do you ask a photographer, hey, can you maybe make a series of images about this this topic, for example, with a really strict opdracht.
Assignment.
Yeah. Most of the time, it's the first one. You either choose to go on Ampe or Getty or iStock, whatever. It depends on, of course, what the news. If it's like hard news, journalist news, it's usually Ampe or journalist Getty Images. The second part so that's one decision that you have to make. The second decision is you're as good as the terms that you search for. So if you as an image editor are looking with the term allochtoon, I can already imagine what kind of images you're going to be seeing, which is the biases of...
Does Legeto know what allochtoon means?
What is that
something that's used in South
translation?
Africa?
Allochtoon is...
Well, it's kind of like somebody who's not from here. So it's like foreigner, or, well, it's not really foreigner, but kind of translates to that, I guess.
Yeah, it's somebody with a different national background. But also, it's the assumption that somebody has a different background most of the time.
But also the outsider.
Somebody who looks like they aren't Dutch. And then that... Probably, but also somebody like me most of the time as well. So yeah, anybody who's not blonde with blue eyes, pretty much. So that's the second thing, is like you as an image editor are only as good as the terms that you're using, which is again what you talked about in the last conversation, which is the power of text. You were saying the power of imagery, but also text informs which images you choose.
It's a combination.
And then the third one is, of course, how much information you're asking from the person who's asking you for the image. So if I, as an image editor, am only looking for an image based off of a small 5-word text, and that 5-word text changes into a 10-word header, a 10-word header that implies something completely different than was asked of me, the context of the image also changes completely. So you also, as an image editor, have to trust the person who's asking you for the image, but you also have to stand really firmly if the context of the image chooses once it goes online. You as an image editor also have to be like, okay, well, maybe we have to change the image because this doesn't fit with what you asked me.
And does that happen often? These are things I'm curious about because, of course, I know how it worked with the newspaper I worked for, but how often do you go like, okay, this is a misrepresentation of this story or this article, so I'm going to change it. I'm going to take it up to my.
It happens once in a while. I don't want to say it happens every week, but I would say it's like maybe once in a month.
Can you name a situation where you really stepped up as in, this is something we need to change or can do?
I didn't send a screenshot of this, but a while ago we took photographs at the demonstrations against violence for women at the Dam, and we had taken a lot of beautiful photographs taken.
Violence against women? You mean? Yeah. Okay.
And we took photographs of. We decided to go with a story that focused on men who were present at the demonstration because, what kind of reflections did they have based on this demonstration.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happened was that it became an image of a black man and a white woman standing next to each other with sharing a banner. But then the header was angry men. And then for me, I go, what is this? Because you're associating the image of a black person, a black man specifically, with angry men at a demonstration that was actually just like very powerful.
And he was there to support.
And he was there supporting. And then I'm like, this image association game that I'm playing right now is not good. So we have to change this immediately.
Yeah.
Whereas
although it was a beautiful picture.
It was a beautiful image and a beautiful demonstration. But I immediately was like, no, we have to change this now.
Because of the headline.
Because of the header, right? Yeah. But also, this was a header that was only online. On paper, it was completely different. So that's also something that we have. And also, it's different.
Why is that? Is that more like the clickbait factor?
Yeah. Yeah, it's what Seada was saying earlier was you have A and
things
B.
don't work on paper the way they work online. So you can, even with our print version, we change the images that we use for the print version if we put it online, because those images just don't work online. If you have like a beautiful photo series you've given it a lot of thought, it's been a lot of searching, but if you put it online, it just falls flat. People don't appreciate, sounds a bit, but they don't really appreciate, it's not about beauty or depth, it's about recognition. Do I immediately click with this image, and does it tell me something that I need to know right now?
Yeah, we consume print differently.
And it's
online.
about immediate it's about immediate recognition, immediate instant gratification. All that stuff plays a role, I feel. So we've tried it, we've done even illustrations and stuff like that, but it doesn't really work. But this is the image I think
this is another image, right?
This is an image, but it's also in we can also talk about this one. So this is an example of how framing works within journalism. So we have a demonstration here on the right page of a Corona demonstration in Amsterdam. And this was a demonstration that was actually quite peaceful. Like there were no people were arrested.
A protest of 25,000 people.
Yeah, and nobody was arrested, and it was only a very small group of hooligans that decided to bring red flare guns, and I can totally understand from this photographer's perspective.
And it's a huge picture compared to the text.
Yes, and also it's
that's the story.
Yeah, the story is on the right.
Actually, to make it. To make it more important is like this is a loose image, so it's a image that's supposed to tell the story in one glance with a very short explanation on the side. So this is the story, and it's
this is the only.
This is the whole story and the whole text.
Yeah, so that's.
So I can completely understand why the photograph took this
150
image.
words or something.
Probably less.
Less. It's not even 100.
I think it's like 100.
Yeah.
I can completely understand why the photographer took this photo. It's very interesting, of course, as a photographer to focus on the people who were making a little bit more of a ruckus. But we got a reader's tip or a reader's
suggestion.
Saying, you're kind of warping the frame here because this was just a really small group of 5 people who decided to bring a flare gun and it was a peaceful protest as far as Corona demonstrations were peaceful. And you're warping the frame here. And then online, we had already chosen a different picture. That was the next slide. And this is a much better representation of what the group of people look like. And that's a very important...
This is a more accurate representation of the other 24,900.
It's a much more accurate representation. And I think what this image taught us more recently is not only for this type of demonstration, but for all demonstrations, is that we really brief the photographer and being like, look, we understand that it's very interesting to focus on more of the troublemakers sometimes in demonstrations, but we really need a more global aerial view of this, of the whole demonstration, because we trust you completely. And if you only deliver 4 images of red flare guns and 1 image like this, we're going to assume, based on what you delivered, that it was mostly
that's what happened.
Hooligans.
Yeah.
Whereas that wasn't the case. So the importance of an image editor here is looking at not only 1 image, but the whole series collected, but also being sure that the image that you do select is a more accurate representation, even though it's a less interesting photograph.
Lageto, I see you nodding a lot. The actual representation.
It speaks to the dangers of using images to illustrate an article. I mean, something happened last week, I don't know if you guys have seen it, in the New York Times. The article was about Serena Williams, GOAT, the greatest of all time. And they used this image.
They used what?
They used an image of Venus.
Her sister. Okay.
Yeah, you have to laugh, but that's not funny.
Well, it's happened. It's happened before. It's happened before.
It's not the first time.
Using stock photos to illustrate a story that might not be even related to the actual time and moment of that image. I think it's just one has to be really kind of careful, because in terms of how you show that this collaboration, the image communicates with an article, rather than the image trying to illustrate story that's not the image story. So I think for me, it's just around how do you ensure this mutual balance of representation between the image, which has its own kind of story and context, and the article itself. And I think it happens again in my country, South Africa, where images of violence, for example, we had horrible violence last year, but some of the images that were used, especially online, are not necessarily related to that to the violence. An image of 1989 was used in an event that happened now. So that context shifts quite a lot, because the frame itself, all these clues, all these little pointers, speaks to a certain time and period and certain experience that needs to be respected in that context. So to throw it into a story that's not even related with its own intention is highly problematic. Again, we see with Ukraine, some of the images that are used are not even from Ukraine. So it becomes, I think, also harboring into the propaganda space, where you push an agenda with an image that has a specific context to elevate the story that's been written out. So again, I'm critical around that, because I believe that we need to give photographers work. They need to go out and photograph whether it's a story. But yeah, just a little.
I actually brought an image from Ukraine.
Yeah, let's take let's put it on the screen.
Yeah, so it's not really an image. It's actually a still from video that went viral. I think maybe.
What are we seeing here?
So we're seeing an image of a small boy who was crossing the border from Ukraine to Poland. I think he was almost there, and he was filmed while crying while he was, walking into Poland. And for days, the headlines were, this small boy has fled Ukraine by himself. So his child is alone. But he wasn't alone. His mother was in front of him. And actually everybody knew, but it was, it was such a compelling idea, of a young boy, left alone. There actually were kids who were sent off by themselves, I think, or maybe with other people, neighbors. But this wasn't the case. And then after, I think this week, it came out that he wasn't alone. What I found interesting, so that's one of the things that we're seeing in this. I think it's very much also a very mediatized war. I don't think I've ever seen a war this mediatized ever, when it comes to even from people being babies being born in bunkers, and people playing piano music or whatever in the subways, and from these types of things. So it speaks to
in Western media outlets.
Sorry?
Especially in Western media outlets.
Yeah, so there is this, I wouldn't say romanticized, it's not romanticized, but it is, it's kind of romanticized. Let me put it that way. So there is this idea that this was such a, I think it was quite soon everybody knew he wasn't alone, but the story was so good, so they couldn't let go, I guess. But what I found interesting about this particular is that his face was everywhere, recognizable. And this was, I think, the Independent decided to blur his face, which I hadn't seen anywhere else. Everywhere else, he was just, his face was visible. And so this was interesting to me because I have never, in 8 years that I covered stories from the African continent, seen a child's face blurred.
Do you know the argument why they?
I don't know. No, because they're actually the only ones that I could find that had his face blurred. And the weird thing is that the video was going viral, so it was already it didn't really make that much sense because But I found it interesting. I think it's also, I don't know what this child would think, if his face was everywhere. And he's, 5 years later, he sees himself crying, and in a story that was also not even, completely accurate. So I just brought it because I think, like Legeto said, there are these images you just want to see, or something like, and I think that also might play a role in like media, in newsrooms, and in because. They're just too good. For instance, when there was a lot of violence in South Africa with immigrants, African immigrants, and, there was these stories about, black on black violence, and South Africans hating other Africans coming to South Africa, taking up jobs, taking up opportunities. And I think there was this image of a guy with a burning tire around his neck, or somebody tried to set fire on him. And it turned out that it had nothing to do with this topic at all. But we were so appalled by the image, and it was so, something that it becomes this thing, this self-fulfilling thing that you just want to be true, or something, where you can just put the, kind of put the pieces together, and you can say, you see, South Africans are, we helped them through apartheid and everything, and now this is how they pay us back. And it becomes kind of like a gossip that you don't want to end, So I think this is also in part what happens when it's about, for instance, Muslim women, do we really want to see them in another light, Is that necessary? I think it's also kind of, it fits in something we already know. It's comfortable,
Well, Chidem, I know the answer that you're going to give, but...
What do I...
It wasn't a question. It wasn't a question.
Yeah, we want something.
Yeah,
of course we do. Of course we do. But I'm talking about from the perspective of general public. It's the same with stories. Like, do you really want to know the other side? Do you really want to know the other truth, or maybe the uglier truth, or something that's not comfortable for you? I think it's also a human thing where we don't want to see our worldview, put upside down, or. I think that's part of why we keep seeing these repetitive images of the same thing.
Yeah, it's why we keep these flaws, like...
Keep them going.
Keep them going.
And actually, talking about criticism from outside, we had some criticism from Chidem recently. This was like last week or the week before, I think.
I think 2 weeks ago.
Maybe you can explain, Chidem, what was the...
comment you made.
OneWorld published an article about the change of the words allochtoon and people with a migration backgrounds. There was kind of a research report.
CBS, so the Dutch Statistics Bureau decided, which is something
Is this
that...
also the image that...
This is the image that we had in first. So this is it was a story about terminology for people from, like we said, allochtoon or people with a migrant background, or every 2-3 years they change the word because it becomes tainted and it has negative connotations, and then we invent a new word, but
and
the
can you
system
give an
doesn't
image
change.
description of the image that you used?
So first of all, I'm the chief editor, so I don't pick out the pictures. So the image description, I don't know. I guess it was one of those terms that we used, but the idea was to use an image that shows the all the different types of people that live in a city like Amsterdam or Rotterdam or The Hague. Without it becoming this really stock image, because usually when you look in, we use like iStock, and we are not subscribed to AMP, because AMP is super expensive. We're a tiny title. We're not that tiny, but we're too tiny for it to pay off, because like a newspaper, they publish I don't know how many pictures every day, so that pays off. But for us, it's just it's too expensive. So we use other image banks, but the images that you get there, often they're either super oversimplified, or they become very like so if I would type in, I don't use it, but if I would type in like diversity or something, which is a word I hate, but anyway, let's say
sometimes have to use it to get the images that you need.
But then you would get like a white and a black person holding hands or something super like Hallmark card cliche. You'll take it. Well, I won't. But so that's the things that you can choose from, which it becomes very commercial and like. So this was one of the thing that we saw, okay, these are all different types of people living in the city. Actually, this is kind of cut
at a
off.
bus stop.
Yeah, there's 3 women without a headscarf, 3 women with, and then there's a man on the outside who I think has either Afghan or Pakistani type of traditional wear, and I think there was somebody on that side as well. But because of social media, it was cut off. Anyway, she then went and mailed us immediately, and she went like, "Okay, I don't like this picture at all. I think it's way too focused on the 3 Muslim women, and I think it's very cliche to talk about people with a migrant
because they are
background."
Positioned in the middle of the picture.
Yeah, I mean, at first glance, you see the 3 women in the middle, and then you see migratieonderzoek. Again, the stereotype
migration
frame.
Research is the word under.
Yeah, it's again the cliche and the stereotype frame. Muslim women are being pushed in all the time by the media, and by using this picture, you are contributing to that stigma again. You are putting them again in the context of migration, of allochtoon, of again. So we desperately need to talk about how to visualize these themes. How do we visualize our articles about migration? How do we visualize it? How can we make other pictures other than using, again, the women with the headscarf? I mean, it really affects the daily lives of these women. We really need to put those women in other contexts.
Yeah.
Really.
I think for us it became because we never use those types of images, it almost became like we saw like all different types of people, right? So we kind of even our so we don't even see what the general public sees anymore, which was actually the kind of the downfall for us. We did change the image because we.
Do we also have the new image?
Yeah, I think we do. We don't? Oh, we sent it.
Can you describe the new image?
Yeah, the new image. I can show you my phone, I guess, but I don't think that's visible for everybody. Well, the new image is actually, which is something we were looking for, I guess. It's just an image of like a huge crowd in a busy street in Amsterdam. Where, let me see if I have it.
Where the focus isn't on a few people.
No,
exactly.
the focus is on the masses, and you can't really distinguish one person from the other. So it's like, is this one? No.
With articles like this, we also tend to prefer images that focus on a broader spectrum of people. So
you don't really see what the focus is on.
Or where you see that, for example, Rotterdam is known for being the city
this
in
one.
Holland.
Oh yeah, there's no people visible at all. It's just
like
you don't even recognize
a group of ants. Yeah.
So you just recognize a group of people that could come from any place in the world, and and your own biases can't.
But I think what's interesting and what I kind of found out is that I wasn't thinking through the lens of the photographer. So Cheatham immediately recognized that he was focused on these women. Everything else was kind of like not really, it was there, but it wasn't really the center of his attention.
Yeah.
So
and it was not even just the image, it was also how it was cropped and everything.
But that wasn't the photographer, that was us, because of,
even then.
Yeah, but you can find this image on the Instagram page of OneWorld, who is interested.
Yeah.
Yes, Lagetto.
Yeah, I think also just to jump in around framing, and generally we speak about the photojournalist as a witness rather than an author. I actually submitted 2 images of the same region, Sudan. One image was made in 1993.
Yeah, this is the image that you're talking about. It's a pretty famous image.
A chromatic, for us, iconic image that represented famine in Africa. Basically, it ended up being an iconic image as a reference to the continent of Africa, irrespective. But also how the photographer navigated the space using a long lens to frame in such a way that the vulture looks like it's about to go for that young human being there. So for me, it speaks to issues of ethics as an image maker. We know very well that, he ended up committing suicide a few months after this image. I guess there are other pressures, because I think we need to acknowledge that photojournalists, especially those that are in the front line, experience traumatic events and happenings, and it ends up affecting them. And I think in many ways, dictating how they photograph going forward. So for me, it's a sheer example of Kevin Gaddis. Kevin Gaddis was a wonderful guy, but this image for many of us contradicts his.
Yeah, by the way, the picture is called Starving Child and Vulture, for whoever wants to look that up.
Highly problematic. In the same region, 30 years later, there's another image, because Sudan also is one of those countries in the continent that has experienced instability for a long time. So this image was submitted by Shiva, who is a Japanese photojournalist based in Kenya for AFP.
Yeah, this is the World Press Photo of the Year 2020, recently.
And it's a young person. Basically, he was sent in because there were uprisings around across the city. He could have chosen an image to represent conflict and anger and hunger, but he experienced humanity within that turmoil, that conflict. And this is, I think, for me, one of the best examples of what choices can a photographer make to truly represent humanity in times of, instability and conflict. And to juxtapose both, about the same religion experiencing hardship, but the latter humanized the human beings. I don't believe that Kevin Carter did that in that image that he made. That ended up being, one of the most viewed, shared image from the 90s.
So do you think that because you know, as somebody who's now in the arts, but you've worked in journalism a lot and media. How do you think we should portray things like conflict, things like famine? Because it's on the one hand, you need to show what's going on, right? You need to focus attention on things that are going wrong, because that's our job. On the other hand, how do you do that without it being dehumanizing and colonial? So, because for instance, I come from Ethiopia. The image of starving children is kind of, was invented in our country, I would say. But, I mean, not by us, but by media. And it's not just Ethiopia, it was Biafra before that. There were these very, these stereotypes that started to be, synonymous almost for African children. Mm-hmm. On the one hand, it gave attention to a serious problem, but I do think it was it's not just the attention. You also want the story to be accurate and correct, and the information to be useful and not just for shock value or for attention alone, because the action that follows that attention should be effective. It started things like Band-Aid, which is just, I don't know. To me, it's really horrific, as in horrific in the sense that it started this entire industry of celebrity aid and celebrity. I don't know. I think people here are too young to know what Band-Aid is.
Yeah, it was endorsement almost as well.
Sorry?
Endorsement. Almost.
Yeah, it became a brand or something, and I guess it gave some people a new career.
Yeah, they became ambassadors.
Yeah, like Bono and what's that guy, Bob Geldof, and he had one hit, and after that it was Band-Aid. What his career was. But what do you think is because you've worked as you've worked in media for so long. What do you see as a way forward?
We need to learn each other. We need to try by always to know beyond our frame of reference. Because I think some of this stereotyping happens because people grow up within this particular culture and they don't go out and they tell stories of the world through the cultural experience that they've grown up with. So, for example, North America, when there is violence by white kids, the images, the type of images that come out of it, that are put on front pages of New York Times and the Blacks in Washington Post, are totally different to if it's a non-white violent experience. There's a certain level of othering. In South Africa, as we speak today, young people stood up, and there's a tribunal that has been established by the Human Rights Commission of this country around representation and stereotyping in advertising, the commercial space. Meaning that creatives produce work to suit a certain problematic stereotype to sell a product. The same, I think, with Africa. Because Africa is stereotyped as this, you need to push this agenda for the story to be more effective. And for me, I strongly believe that an image can be effective without dehumanizing anybody. What COVID-19, for example, representation of different ethnic groups. If you go through the catalog of the past 2 years, you'll definitely experience that photographs that comes from Italy, the UK, Canada, United States, of white people in those spaces is highly dignified. Outside of that is none. So it's clear that there's a culture that has been established, that is entrenched within the practice itself of othering. And we need to start with that. For it to start, there has to be a lot of self-reflection. We need to understand we're humans, and I think we need to go beyond our understanding of the other. We need to begin to travel
Yeah.
I think the virtual platform allows us to travel to other spaces, to other cultures, to begin to learn more about them. What makes them tick? How do they understand themselves? For you to be able to say, I'm going to be a medium to represent their story and their voices, you have to have a certain level of an understanding. So that's why for me, I strongly believe, because I believe in education, especially photographic education, that people that are making photographs should go to school. And schools needs to have sources of referencing that are contemporary, that are now. I think there's a certain level of unlearning that we need to do, especially with the archives of libraries that we have around the history of photography, which is highly problematic because it's male-dominated and it's white males. And that in itself, it becomes a single voice, that visual voice that has become what younger photographers reference and aspire to. And we begin to feed and grow the same type of male photographers. Even in our spaces, young black men begin to aspire to some of the problematic white photographers of the 80s and 70s that photographed in a very problematic way. And they take this and they become a way of making images, because they say, like, this is the best way of doing images. So education plays a huge role. Forums such as this, where we engage and critique, even you establish institutions such as New York Times, Guardian, NGO, National Geographic, we need to begin to engage and critique them from a global kind of position, which is much more diverse.
Yeah. Rochelle, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I agree completely. I think especially with critique, I think the importance of critique cannot be understated, because only with critique can we respond to the needs of not only our readers, but what society requires from photojournalism. So I am a firm believer that critique is a form of caring, and you don't, if you don't care, you're not going to critique. So I welcome any form of critique that's ever given to the newspaper and to images. So I don't think that can be understated. But I also think what we as newspapers have to really look at is the aesthetics of photojournalistic images. I think as photo editors, we're often drawn to beautiful images, but things like famine, like war, like these really heavy subjects, they're not beautiful. And even though we're drawn to the very beautiful images of these photographers with beautiful light taken during the golden hour of ruins of a recently bombarded city, it's not the reality, or at least it's not the full picture. So I think we also have to pay attention to the aesthetics of that we're drawn to, because those also are informed by the cliched images that we grow up with. And I think, so I think also looking at our aesthetics and the aesthetics that we're drawn to is also quite important in that.
Yeah. We're going to wrap up this hour that we're actually live casting, and then continue the conversation in here. Chidem, maybe some last words to add to these advices?
I agree with the two guests, and I think in the Netherlands, I need a critical conversation within our profession, and that includes the photographer, the photo editor, and everyone who works at a newspaper. We really have to learn to receive critiques, and we really have to be more aware of our own power. What do we show to the rest of society? Because for most people, the newspaper, news websites, or the magazines or the TV programs they look at and they read, it's their only, they get their, that's the only place that they get their information from. So those places are the window to the world for them. So in that way, it really shapes the way people look at our society, at themselves, at other people. And we really have to debate and to discuss our power and our biases and our blind spots, and be able to restructure and be able to work differently. We have to be really open about that. And we are not that far in the Netherlands.
Yeah, and I think it's also a question of who is behind the lens, right? If you look at for instance, I did an interview with a huge newspaper, one of the biggest in this country, and I asked them, can you provide me with a black photographer? Because I would feel more comfortable, because it's a big photo shoot, and I feel more confident and more comfortable if there's a black photographer who understands my skin tone, who understands, lighting and stuff like that. And they couldn't provide me with one. They didn't have not one black photographer in their database, not one. And then I even provided a couple of them, a couple of photographers that I work with, and they decided.
Often the excuses, we can't find them, they're not there.
And I was like, here's a whole list that published in my magazine, and I think I make a pretty nice magazine, and we have high quality. I feel like we have high quality photography. It's better quality than what I usually see in newspapers, but they told me that it wasn't of their standard. So I didn't work. I worked with a very nice white photographer, but the fact that they can't even produce anybody, they don't have anybody in their network and in their circles, is, I think, highly problematic. Yeah. If you see how many of these topics they cover.
Yeah, so there are solutions
on the regular. Actually. Yeah, so for instance, the fact that I'm sure that IMP mostly has white male photographers. So that's why you see these, kind of sneaky pictures of Muslim women passing, and he's behind the bush and he takes a picture and he can send it off, because he wouldn't know how to approach, I guess, a Muslim woman. Or maybe there was one of the first things that Seada did for us, or the first of her series, is a picture of Bertine van Manen, who's an old photographer. I can't say she's an old. She's 80. She's 80 years old now, but in the 80s and 70s, she did some groundbreaking work where she, well, you know more about this, but where she photographed the women migrant workers. So you had migrant workers, men that were, people knew about them, but there was also a huge group of women working in factories, but they were completely invisible in society. And she managed to not only photograph them at work, but also in private situations as full human beings. And this was a thing she did back in end of 70s. This is something that actually ended after she. So it was possible, but the thing is, she connected to the women, and she took the time and she put the effort in. So yeah, if you just stand behind a bush, that's the image you get, and if you don't connect to the subject. So I think it's also a question of how many photographers that are not, that are not the dominant from the dominant group or the dominant norm, get an opportunity to become a photographer, and get a chance to do something. For even if I ask, they could have said, "We'll take a chance."
What do you think is needed?
Yeah, just give somebody an opportunity. Just give somebody an opportunity. I work with young people all the time that I've never worked with, and I just give it a shot.
Okay, so we heard a few solutions already during this hour. It's like partly education. It's giving other people opportunities. People like you are working on it and taking responsibility.
Receiving critique as well.
Oh, and be open to critique. Before we go to questions here, I want to say goodbye to people watching and listening online. Thank you for being part of this, listening to the stories here. Thank you also for everyone contributing to this conversation here. Of course, Seada, Chidem, Rachel, Legeto, thank you for being part of this conversation. We will be back on the 28th of March, so in 2 weeks, with the third episode of this triptych. And then we are going to talk about creating a new newsroom. if you want to know more about the Fellowship of OneWorld, you can also listen to the podcast on Pakhuis de Zwijger's website, in which we interviewed you together with your partner, John Olivieira, publisher of OneWorld. Well, next to the fellowship that we are going to proceed with OneWorld, we also want to introduce our next fellowship, and that will start on 11th of April together with Dafina Misijan. And another thing that we're going to organize in April is another triptych about co-design. Together we design. Well, thank you for watching this episode. And if you want to support Pakhuis de Zwijger, you can do that at dezwijger.nl/pay. And for now, I want to say good night.